It broke the internet overnight.
A new artificial intelligence tool is going viral.
It's called ChatGPT.
It can answer follow-up questions. It can admit its own mistakes.
When ChatGPT came out, it really quickly gained traction. You might ask it, write a poem about unicorns, and it might spit out something that sounds just like it was written by someone. That really struck a chord with a lot of people. It also struck a chord with investors.
Tech companies and their investors have sunk billions of dollars into building AI systems with the bet that these tools will keep getting more sophisticated and one day prove wildly profitable.
There's this concept in AI that if you just sort of keep feeding an AI model more and more data, and more compute power, that it will start to just sort of teach itself and become smarter and smarter.
But progress seems to be getting a little bit trickier for some of these big companies.
As expenses skyrocket, an industry known for moving fast and breaking stuff could be slowing down.
I think the progress is going to get harder. When I look at 25, the low-hanging fruit is gone.
They're trying to figure out, how do we make these models that are getting increasingly expensive, eating up increasing amounts of computing power, worth that trade-off, right? If you're not getting this incredible boost in performance, what do you do?
AI really started in the 1950s. Alan Turing being one of the really early academics.
You might be familiar with the Turing test. There have been, since then, a bunch of periods of AI innovation, and then what you might call an AI winter.
But fast forward to today, in the past couple years, this intense pickup in AI came from the breakthroughs that we saw with OpenAI, with ChatGPT.
Search as we know of it is going to change, and the web as we know of it is going to change.
I was very skeptical, like I did not expect ChatGPT to get so good.
When ChatGPT came out, it looked like, wow, overnight we have this huge advancement. It sort of came out of nowhere for most people.
I think it really kickstarted a lot of interest in innovating in AI and also investing in AI and companies trying out using generative AI.
ChatGPT and AI systems like it work by using massive software engines called large language models, or LLMs.
A large language model is an AI system that's trained on lots of data sourced from the internet typically, and it can respond to written prompts with other amounts of text that sound really like they were written by a human.
To do this, these models use an algorithm to process the parameters of any given prompt. And this is how that unicorn poem comes into being.
And people keep expecting these companies to keep rolling out better and better models that are more and more capable.
What if I were to say that you're related to the announcement, or that you are the announcement?
Me? The announcement is about me? Well, color me intrigued.
For a while, these models have been getting better quickly, but right now, at least 3 of the top companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google, are having issues training their models to the level where they would like them to be.
The easy gains there are gone. We will keep scaling them, but it will not be at the same rate of pure scale that we've seen in recent years. So we're working on new things too.
Good curated data sets that are created by humans are increasingly scarce. I mean, the internet at this point has been largely scraped by these companies. So if you want to make models better than what they are now, you need yet more data. That's harder and harder to find. Some companies are going as far as paying people that have advanced degrees to help train their models so that they can get this expertise to get better data.
So how do you continue to teach an AI? Where do you get that data from? Especially once this AI is getting so smart that it needs expert level data. It needs the kind of data that a PhD student or a Nobel Prize winner would be able to give you. How do you get all of that? How do you feed all of that when it's not as simple as just scraping the web anymore?
Some projects are experimenting with what's called synthetic data, which includes training AI with content that is itself AI generated.
Synthetic data basically means you take the output of an AI model and actually use that to start training more AI models, right? But of course, that has its challenges, and that's still a technique that's being tested, right? And we don't know how much companies can really rely on that, or they will need to continue to also actually get human-created, higher quality data.
Yeah, they've covered so many good points so far. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of go through some of those things again. So generally speaking, the way most models work is that they basically go through training through like neural networks or other similar technologies and techniques. And so basically what happens is that you basically get a bunch of data and you show the input that you would like to see, and then you show the output. And then you basically tell the computer in the algorithm, this is what I want you to be able to tell me. When you see something that's like this, give me this answer. And with a small portion of data, it's going to be very bad at this. So for example, if you want to tell it to basically like mimic flipping a coin, if you gave it a single data point and it just showed heads, and you said that it was heads on it, then that model could just be, when you see anything, say heads. And so you need to at least be able to show some other examples as well. So like maybe show a coin that shows heads and then maybe one that shows tails. And then now it knows a little bit more. Now it understands that there's a distinction between this one and something else. And so it will know what to do about that a little bit more. And so most of the models basically that have generated kind of all this buzz recently have been based off of similar technologies here, where you gather a bunch of data, you feed it in, and then you have the model learn or understand some way of differentiating what happened there versus what happened elsewhere. And this makes it very easy to learn things or teach a computer to do something that you don't necessarily know yourself. Because historically, before that, you would have to write the algorithm yourself. That's what programmers would do. So basically, like if you want to teach a computer how to like multiply, you would have to teach it and say, this is step by step how you multiply. And so for basic things, this works out pretty well. And this is also where computation and mathematics and a lot of those things were some of the very first things that we use computers for, is because those are the easiest things for it to do, is it knows how numbers work, and you can make simple arithmetic, basically operations on those numbers, and then continue. Now we're progressing into newer and newer things, and some of these technologies have been around for a while. So things like Siri, for instance, used some of these same techniques for voice, like speech, text, etc. And so that was the time that this started to come up. And I think this was when probably a good portion of like the technology space learned about these techniques, and that is really when these things started to get really big. And then people started to look into other ways they could use this. And again, you need a lot of data for that. And so what they're highlighting is that one of the initial early problems that people had was that you need to be able to get curated data in order to process models appropriately. How some of these newer technology companies like OpenAI solved this problem for like LLMs is that basically they had them just scrape the internet. So they looked through a bunch of websites and they were able to see massive amounts of data and text that kind of represented speech and questions and answers. And so they were able to kind of quickly get to that solution. What they're describing as a problem that they're having now is, well, you need to get it to be more advanced in certain areas. And also because there's so many things that are possible in the world, for instance, like you could ask ChatGPT to do a math problem for you. And you could also ask it to write a poem. Those things are very different skills, like the same way that you wouldn't necessarily ask the same human being for a poem or to solve a math problem. Same thing works for a model. And so the more things you want it to do, the harder and harder it gets, because the more data that you get, it can also be conflicting with other things. And so this is where problems come up as you enter these scenarios. And what they said is exactly what happens in certain cases is you need to start curating your data in a different way. And so at least one of the reasons that they're highlighting that they're kind of starting to slow down, which I think makes sense, is they used what was readily available on the internet. They already have that leverage for their models today. And so it's not like they have this huge plethora of data and use cases that they don't already have associated with them. So they have to go out of their way to find new data sets. And this is something where like the models would generally continue to progress as people use online social media and some of these other websites. But because they've had this backlog of basically the entirety of the internet, so they have maybe decades and decades of data set that they can read into and train the models on. But now that they've kind of caught up to current date, they still need a lot more data to keep advancing noticeably. And they're also going to have to start solving harder and harder problems. So this is something we've seen with ChatGPT where like you can ask it a question and it will lie because it doesn't know that it's lying at that time. Well, it's not sentient to begin with as a separate topic. But because it's just learning from what people do. And so if you think about it as like a child, for instance, if you ask the child of somebody who always said something in a particular way, then that child will say something in that particular way as well. So for instance, you could say, use this for linguistics of some sort and say like somebody who's speaking English, if their parents speak English, their child is probably going to speak English. And so if you ask that child a question, it should be in English and they will probably respond in English. But if you ask a child from another parent who speaks Spanish, that child is probably going to speak Spanish. And so again, this is where you need to get to the source of it and you have to train it appropriately for a variety of purposes. And you're getting into harder and harder problems. So in these cases, the model doesn't know any better because it's been trained in a particular way and it doesn't know anything else. So it's just going to answer in that way. And I think this is probably a challenge that they're running into, which is people lie on the internet. And so that's something that you also have to watch out for is people can misinform other people either intentionally or unintentionally. But either way, it's very hard to like fact check a person, especially on the internet, right at face value. And so this is definitely going to stall some of these cases. And also sometimes you're going to ask it more and more advanced things. So for instance, again, going to the poem example, maybe you are somebody who's getting like a PhD in English and you want to go into some very niche aspect of literature. And you might try asking ChatGPT that, and that's going to be a hard question, the same way like a physicist who's getting their PhD in physics is asking it some advanced equation. Maybe it's going to know one of those things, but not the other. And so being able to train it to know all things all the time is still a pretty hard problem, given a limited data set, and also the fact that the people who are building these models don't have this information. Like myself as a programmer, I'm not going to know everything about literature or physics, etc. And so it's going to be hard for me to validate that and make sure all the data is there. So then you have to start trusting other sources and also, as they mentioned, maybe building those sources yourself.
While we have seen meaningful new products and advances this year, tech companies are struggling to clear the high bar for improvements that would justify the tremendous amount of money they're spending. Because let's be real, AI is not cheap.
The CEO of Anthropic, which is a leading AI lab and probably a number 2 competitor to OpenAI in the startup world, has said, it costs $100 million to train a new AI model, and in the coming years, that could increase to $100 billion.
As we're spending more and more money, the engineering complexity of getting it right is increasing, and that's why companies need to be larger, need to have more talent.
It's hard to say if anyone's making money off of AI right now. We do know that OpenAI has quite a number of paying business customers, but we don't know.
So this is a great point that they're bringing up right now, which I feel like I've brought up in previous videos, which is they're basically making an argument right now that they're not sure if anybody, including these big name companies, has made money off of AI. And I think this is a great point to be made because if you watch a lot of the marketing and the news around businesses, so many companies want to hype up how much more efficient they are now, how they're reducing their workforce because they've gotten all these efficiency gains, they've succeeded at AI and implementing them. And I think this is the actual story that's happening, which is these companies are laying off people because they are short on cash, because they didn't get the return on investment that they had expected. If you as a business really were successful at implementing AI to make your workforce twice as efficient, there's no business owner who would then cut their employee base arbitrarily at that point. Because if every employee is now twice as effective as they used to be, because AI had augmented them in some way, then your business just became 2x as good as it used to be with the same number of people. And so every business would want to 2x their revenue with the same amount of cost, even if they had to put up an upfront of so many millions of dollars to generate the AI model, because they will know looking ahead that investment will continue to pay off once they hit a certain margin or a certain point in time. And so they would definitely keep all of those employees. Like the fact that they're letting people go, in my mind, kind of disproves the fact that they are making these statements. And so just something I would caution to folks, because this is something that I've seen myself being in this industry. My company makes AI models. We sell products based off of those AI models, and I consider us to be fairly successful in the general space. Obviously, we're not Anthropic or something like that. But I think we're fairly successful. But even for us, we struggle to identify how every model that we've made is worth it. Because again, it costs millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to make a brand new AI model that's like top of the line and uniquely useful for some case. And so it's the same thing with any other product, which is like if you do a bunch of research on coming up with some new sneaker and it's not any better than the sneakers that exist, or maybe it's particularly useful for one very odd use case that like barely anybody in the market actually cares about, then you don't actually make any money. And that's the same problem here as it is anywhere else.
How that breaks down in terms of like the exact number of companies that are paying for it, or what kind of benefits these companies are actually seeing.
ChatGPT is one of the most quickly growing consumer software products of all time, but when that will start to match the costs is in question.
But it's not all about the money, is it? Let's keep in mind, OpenAI, for example, was established as a non-profit research company focused on advancing AI for the benefit of humanity. Of course, it plans on shifting to a for-profit model, but the timeline on that is unclear. And still, despite the wintry forecasts, the money keeps pouring in.
They have plenty of money at the moment, but it's not totally clear if companies are going to be using it long term, what kind of return they're getting on their investment. These companies are having to do bigger and bigger fundraising rounds, billions and billions of dollars. And at a certain point, it's unclear where that money is actually going to come from if it's not coming from customers.
Investors may be doubling down because of the promise for even more mind-boggling advancements just around the corner.
OpenAI came out with a new reasoning-based model recently, and the idea there is that if you sort of give these AI models more time to sit and think about a problem, that they can reason their way into giving a more accurate and more intelligent answer. Another breakthrough that may be happening is also around things like agents, which are this idea of a kind of AI that can not just talk to you like a chatbot can, but actually commit tasks for you. Like, let's say, book travel or actually integrate code into an application.
Perhaps the most exciting thing for AI enthusiasts, and the most horrifying for its detractors, is the prospect of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. AGI would be a system that can reason and think like a human, applying its synthetic brain across disciplines, not just reacting to prompts with poems or six-fingered hands, but accomplishing complex tasks independent of us humans, and maybe even surpassing us. Could we one day be working for them?
No one exactly agrees on when we're going to reach AGI or what exactly it will look like. A lot of people are predicting that it can come very quickly, right? You see other people saying it could take decades, it could take a century, it could even never happen. And something like some of these setbacks that we're seeing give people reason to maybe reassess or say, hey, this path to AGI may not be as simple as some wanted.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.